You're protecting that farmland to where you can't put houses on it. You've got to keep it in farmland. But you wouldn't have to do those things if farming was profitable enough to keep it in farming in the first place.
This is the Real Food, Real People podcast.
Rex Ogden farmed near Castle Rock in southwest Washington, and he shares all of the different things that he's done in his past: chicken farming, hay farming, working with beef, and he shares his wisdom on how to preserve the future of family farming here in Washington State. This is the Real Food, Real People podcast. I'm Dylan Honcoop, journeying all over Washington State to get to know the real people behind our food. So talk about, you say you've done just about everything.
Yep.
In farming, that is.
Well, let's put it this way. When I graduated high school, I was raised on a farm.
Yeah. Where at?
In Castle Rock.
Okay.
And I'm the fourth generation to live in that house. My kids are the fifth generation there. So we've been there for a while.
Yeah.
And when I graduated high school, my plan was to be a truck driver. I was going to be a long-haul truck driver. Well, I kind of screwed up my driving record, so I had to do other things. So I went to work in the woods. I set chokers, and I ran skidder and cat, did lots of different things.
Yep.
But my love was always that farm, which is a terrible farm if you want to farm because it's on a hill, and it's steep ground. But I wanted to keep it, and because it had been in the family that long.
Right.
So I bought it from my dad, and if you believe this, that was back in 1970, something anyway. I graduated in 1970, so it would have been 73, 74, somewhere, for $20,000. Now, that piece of ground, 50 acres, is worth a whole lot more than that now.
Wow.
And Dad never figured that he'd live long enough for me to pay it off. But when he died, we were short 2 payments of paying that off.
Oh, no kidding.
So, anyway, I always had to work out to support it. We raised cattle, which gave us our beef, and the cattle always paid the taxes. We always figured that. There was enough they'd pay the taxes. And we were just raising beef. So, I always had to work out. So I worked in the woods. I got my record cleaned up, and I drove a log truck for a while. I learned to drive on a log truck, and then I hauled some chicken feed for 2.5 years because there's a lot of chicken farmers in that valley back then. Mm-hmm. But the beef never paid the bills, so I had to work out.
Yeah.
Well,
and that's the story for so many farmers, too.
It is.
Yeah.
It got to the point where every job I found was in Timbuktu, and you were traveling a lot, you were gone from home a lot, and I said, I got to have a better way than that. So I decided I'm going to build me a chicken house and raise chickens, and you can make it on that. And so I had an old D4 cat, and I cut me out a nice long piece of ground that was flat, and we built us a chicken house. 2-story building. I could raise 30,000 chickens per batch in that. And at the time, you raised 5 batches a year.
What year about was this?
Well, the first ones went in 1989.
Okay.
In the spring of 1989, we put the first birds in there. And I did enjoy doing that. It gave me the freedom to participate in the kids' sports. I coached one of the boys in soccer. My wife coached another one of the boys' soccer teams. We got to go to all the kids' wrestling matches because you could adjust your schedule.
Because you were at home, too.
Because I was at home working for myself.
Yeah.
And I did enjoy that. But then it got to the point where they kept cutting the pay, and we weren't making it as good. And finally, I'd had all I could take of, I won't name the name of the company, but it's the major one in the Northwest, which just got bought out.
Yeah.
And I told them I had everything paid off. I didn't owe a dime to anybody. And so I said, bye-bye. I quit. And I went and got my CDL back and went back to driving truck.
No kidding.
In the last 10 years, and I drove truck, and then I retired. So while I was driving truck, my wife took care of the cows. She did all the feeding. Anything major I'd help out with, but, I was gone every day, 5 days a week.
Yeah.
But it was local. I was home every night, almost.
That's nice that you weren't
So-
long hauling and gone for 2
No.
weeks. And
Driving lowboy, and the farthest away from home we went to North Dakota and picked up a crane one time, and we went to California. Actually, I went to Barstow, California once. That's as far away from home as I ever got. So
yeah.
I like that.
So back to farming chickens.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
How does that work? You talked about building the barn. You had 30,000 birds.
Yeah.
What's the day-to-day on that?
It only took about 2 hours of work when the birds were in there, because all your feed is automatic. And also, you don't buy the birds. The company provides them. The company provides the feed. You provide the labor, the water, the electricity, and all that stuff. And you could actually do it in about 2 hours. You had to walk through twice a day and make sure that everything was working the way it should. And so, like I said, I had lots of time to do other things. And so then I got into custom haying business. I had enough equipment and I made small square bales. I didn't make any big bales. And there was a lot of demand for custom hay, and there still is. People have 5 acres and nothing to put it up with.
Exactly.
But I got tired of wearing out my equipment on somebody else's hay, so
Yeah.
being I retired, we cut back on the farm. As a matter of fact, at one time we were renting a farm. It's north of us about 10 miles at a place called Oliqua, and we were running a total of about 30 brood cows. Now we've cut back. We're just at home, and right now I have 9. I want to keep 10 cows, and that's my max. The barn holds enough hay to feed them, and
Yeah. So you retired, but you're still farming.
I retired, but I almost still farm.
I'm still fascinated by this chicken farming because I really don't know much about it. I haven't been around it much, but it used to be a big deal up where I'm from as well, up in Whatcom County and a lot of other places as well. In fact, my grandpa, when he was young, his first job was driving chicken truck. He was hauling either chickens or eggs from up there down into Seattle.
Right.
And this was in the late 50s.
Yeah.
So back what you were doing, late 80s into the 90s, this is what you're describing is this contract farming kind of stuff, right?
Yes.
And I've been hearing a lot of negative stuff, like out of the Midwest, where that's still a very common thing about that process.
It's getting bigger and bigger. They want to consolidate more and more, and they're vertically integrated, which means they have the chicken, the feed, the egg, the processing plant, and the distribution to the grocery store. And that's the way it's getting.
Why do they do it that way?
Economics. They can do it cheaper. When I first started, actually, it was for Linden Farms, which gets the name from up there, your area.
Where I'm from, yeah.
But it was the Blozier boys, which were in Oregon City. But they had that name. And then they went bankrupt, and Foster Farms bought them out, and I raised for them.
So doing that with those kinds of pressures, is that a doable thing for people anymore? You hear about people getting trapped in that. Is that a thing?
Yes, they get trapped in it because they always come out with, well, those water system isn't good enough, so you need to change and buy this one and put it in. So there you're in debt to the bank. And so you can't walk away. You can't change. And that's why we had gotten everything paid off so I could walk away.
So there were things that you had to pay off that you invested in your own property. Did you owe the company money on different things, or how does that work?
I had enough money salted away that I could pay these off. We had to buy all new water lines, and they said it's because government regulations say that you can't have water in a cup because it'll get contaminated. And yet the ones we got, they're nipple drinkers, but they have a cup underneath to catch the drip, and the bird drinks that drip.
Yeah.
So, you know what I mean? It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, because somebody in an office building somewhere is making the rule.
That's right.
For a good intention, I guess, to foodborne illness, this kinds of things.
That was their points.
But then when it's actually implemented, it doesn't work the way they claim it will.
Yeah, the person on the ground doing it says, wait a minute, we can see that.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's
So only a couple hours a day? I would imagine,
Really?
though, there were probably a lot of other things that you had to do to the property, though.
well, that's when I could do haying and all that stuff, taking care of cows. And we got to where we were intensive grazing, moving the cows every day or every other day.
Yeah.
And to me, that's being a grass farmer.
Yep.
And your cows are just harvesting your crop for you.
Yep.
And so the more grass you can raise, the more cows you can raise.
Yep.
That's
I think more and more people, it seems, are starting to get an appreciation for that system, grazing cattle, and how that's important for a lot of things, including soil health.
yeah.
I mean, why were you doing it at that time? I mean, how long ago was this when you started intensive
Well, I started
grazing?
doing that maybe 30 years ago.
Wow.
We used to get the magazine called the Washington Farmer Stockman. And then it kept getting consolidated to where it was the Western Farmer Stockman. And but I read articles in that where I first got started on it. Well, then you didn't say anything about it for a long time, and all of a sudden here it's come back.
Yeah,
now
it's
they
a
call it
big
mob grazing.
Yeah.
But it's the same thing that we were doing back then.
So explain how that works
Well,
when you're raising beef.
you move the cows. You try not to abuse the ground, so you try to move them every day, and rest what they were just on, and move to the next piece and to the next piece. And if your grass gets ahead of you, I made me a special deal. I used poly fencing, which is that plastic stuff you see,
Yep.
and I made me a deal with a 2x4 and a pulley and a pulley and a window weight and a pulley, so that I could pull about 20 feet of slack and then use rod posts. And you can move these just 3 feet, and the
Yep.
cows lead underneath there. And they never did tromp down the grass
Right.
and let it go to waste. And you move that sometimes 2 or 3 times a day.
Yep.
And then when you finally run out of stuff, then you'd move it far enough. And then you got to bring your back fence up. And I think I wouldn't say it doubled my forage, yield, but
Yeah.
it increased it. And then,
That's what I hear. And it seems like the science, they're still learning more things about why that actually works.
yeah.
I mean, at the time, was there a reason given of what the mechanism was of what? Because it is about an intensive grazing too, where they're all on one piece, they're grazing it pretty heavily and then resting.
But then you get them off of it and it can recover.
Yeah.
And another thing is, they say that when you first graze it off, if you look, even like mowing your lawn, there's stuff that comes back up just that little bit.
Yep.
Well, that's the starch that's stored in the roots comes back up to give that so that it can start using photosynthesis. Well, if they graze that back off, then it's stunted again. But if you let that from the roots come up, and then the photosynthesis starts out, it gets it a boost, and it helps it
Some
go.
chemistry and biology going on here. Photosynthesis and starches.
That's the science, bro, that they've told me.
Yeah.
I'm not a scientist. I just do what they told me.
But I think it is important, too, you were listening to that stuff. You weren't just going out and doing it the same old way that you had always done it, or your dad had done it, or your grandpa, or whoever.
Right. Because when I was growing up, you just turned them out. And that was the pasture field. And, of course, they eat the choicest, tastiest stuff first.
Yep.
And again, and again, and again. And the rank stuff goes to seed, and pretty soon all you got is that stuff.
Yep.
So,
Well, field management.
Yep.
It's a pretty old system, though, managing cattle on ground. That's the other thing.
Yeah.
It's not like it's a new idea. This has been going on for millennia.
Yeah. And, of course, I'm in the wet side of the state. If you're in eastern Washington, it's a complete different ballpark.
Yeah.
I don't know how they do that in the sagebrush areas.
Yeah. Checking in real quickly to thank our sponsors. Dairy Farmers of Washington, for one, has been a faithful supporter of this podcast since the beginning. And they continue to be. wadairy.org is their website. They share a lot of great information there, similar to what we do, stories about farms and the dairy farmers that produce the delicious dairy products from Washington State. They also share a lot about why those products are superior quality and good for you, and just lots of information about nutrition and recipe ideas and you name it. Check it out, wadairy.org. Also, Mana Insurance Group supporting the podcast. Love those folks. That's where I do my insurance stuff. They take great care of me. They were founded actually by a high school classmate of mine, and he's still their leader. I know quite a few folks on their team. Great folks, very trustworthy. ManaInsuranceGroup.com. Check them out online. Now back to our conversation at the Washington State Fairgrounds in Puyallup with Rex Ogden on the Real Food, Real People podcast.
Being a small beef producer in Western Washington, or really anywhere in the state, how did that work for you? I've been hearing, and we've talked a lot about it on the podcast with other producers, it's really hard to get kill dates and get things into the butcher, and the USDA issue, and how do you market it, and who's,
Yep.
What's your take on that whole situation?
It's getting harder all the time. I've gotten to where I don't sell anything at the auction if I don't absolutely have to. I have a cousin who lives just down the road from me, and he raises Herefords. And him and his son, they have butchered, put it that way,
Yeah.
up to 30 animals. And they're all sold before they're butchered.
Wow.
But the thing is, he's got to schedule that kill date when they butchered last year's kill date.
A year in advance.
Yeah, there's to just call him. He says, well, I can't do anything for 6 months. They're booked up that tight. And what we need is another butcher shop. We used to have two there in Cowlitz County, and the one marijuana was more profitable, and they turned it into a marijuana grow, and now he's sold it and got clear out of there. But
and
we needed that. The cut and wrap, too.
It's heavily regulated.
Yeah.
A lot of cost that goes into meeting all that.
Yep.
And it's hard work. And it's a special skill. It's an art.
Oh, yeah.
I've heard from, butchers here on this podcast talking about it. And it's like, I can see why people don't get into it, but they should.
Yeah. Matt's Meats there, and he's actually out Rose Valley. It's Kelso.
Yeah.
He built a new place in Longview where you come pick up your stuff. Now, I thought that what he was going to do was have Walt's Meats, which is in Woodland, and it's a USDA-inspected slaughter.
Mm-hmm.
You could take your animal there, have it butchered, and then he would take it to Matt's and cut and wrap it, and I could sell it.
Is that way you could sell it by the cut?
Yes.
Rather than having to buy half a cow
Yes.
with the custom exempt.
Yes.
Yeah.
And now you understand that, so you've been
I've been
around
learning.
enough to,
I've been learning on this podcast as I talk to people about
so
this.
that's why, but it hasn't happened yet, and that's what we need. Because I wouldn't mind holding mine for another 6 months and fattening them up, and even selling them grass-fed. Because with good grass, they grow good and they get fat. But
and that's a better way to sell it directly into the local market.
Yes.
So the whole thing stays right here, rather than just selling it into the system and who knows where things go.
yeah, I watched quite a few YouTube videos, and one of them is the best. Just a Few Acres Farm. He's from New York, and that's what he does.
Yeah.
Only he raises Dexter cows, and that's his selling point. That they're better than anything else.
What kind of cattle do you raise?
They're crossbred. I have 6. They were out of a limousine or a Red Angus bull, and they look like Red Angus cows. And the rest of them, I've got a black Angus one, and I've got a black white face one, and I've got a heifer coming up that's a black white face, and I'm going to keep her. But right now, my cousin loans me a young bull every year to breed mine because he needs to open his heifers that he's going to butcher about 2 months before they're slaughtered so that they settle down. They don't come into heat. And so I get to use his bull, which keeps him away from them.
Right.
And then gets it back. We work really well together.
Yeah. Hey, heck of a deal.
Him and I have always been, we raised across the road from each other. So.
Well, there's another thing that farmer knowledge about those natural systems.
Yeah.
How that all works and
Yeah.
how the animals behave and how their bodies work and all that.
Yeah, yeah.
You can't just jump in and do that without any background or...
Well, that's right. If you're wanting to start out from scratch, you've never been on a farm before, there's a lot of, I'll put it this way, it's a steep learning curve.
Yeah.
Now, there are other things that you could get into that aren't as intense or whatever as cattle. And cattle is probably the poorest return on your dollar. You know, it takes a lot of money to do it, a lot of ground. 5 acres, you could run maybe 2 cows, but you better buy 2 steers and butcher them in the fall, you know.
Right. That's one of the criticisms, though. People say, oh, it takes so much land to grow beef.
Yeah.
But what kind of land are you running your cattle on? I mean, is it cropland or is it?
You couldn't crop it.
And that I think that's an important part that doesn't get recognized.
I do make hay on it, and I have made hay on that steepest piece, but I shouldn't have.
You almost roll your tractor over?
Well, you go up and down the hill, but the baler pushes you down the hill, and one time I spun out going up. But
so this is rough, steep terrain.
It is steep ground, but that's what my great-grandfather bought back in 1923.
Yeah. But cows,
the cows don't
naturally, they probably like walking hills and stuff, and
they don't care.
Browse around, and
it's gentle enough with a low ground pressure tractor, or low center of gravity tractor. Put it that way. I can spread fertilizer on it. I can brush hog if I have to. I can pasture harrow, which spreads around the manure and keeps things flat. And then, of course, the rest of the farm is in timber. So we just logged a big chunk this year. So that's my retirement. I'd always said that was my retirement. And I watched them trees grow and grow and grow. And then they're so big that no mills are big. We'll cut them.
Wow. Well, that's farming too then.
Yeah.
It's just a lot longer term.
Yeah,
harvesting those, and then now this log's probably getting replanted.
Oh yeah, it's already replanted, but it opens up a lot of field edge that used to be in the shade either the morning or the evening.
True.
It's going to get a lot of sun, so the hay in that one field's going to dry a whole lot faster.
Yeah,
than it used
that'll be
to.
Nice. That'll be nice.
Yeah.
Or maybe it'll get too dry, and then you'll need to irrigate.
No, I got no water to irrigate.
So no irrigation.
No irrigation. As a matter of fact, usually it dries up enough in August that we end up having to feed hay. So any leftover hay from last year, we get moved to where I can feed it in the fall. And then there's another point, too, that getting a large animal vet now is getting to be a problem. If you're going to sell a heifer as a breeding animal, they have to be bangs, vaccinated, and to do that, the vet has to do it. That's one of the vet things that I can't do myself. We do most of the other things ourselves, and we've learned that. That's another learning curve that a new person would have to learn.
Yeah, animal health stuff.
Yeah, how to give injections and what to look for this or that, you know.
Yeah, be the doctor for your.
You about got to be your own doctor. My vet is still alive, but he's retired. I think he's 90.
Yeah. And when you're talking about injections, you're talking about things to keep them healthy, make sure they, if they get sick, not like injecting them with hormones or something. I mean, there's that perception out there with beef. You see no hormones. I'm thinking, well, what beef
I've never done that. There is a growth hormone, and it's a little pill they put in the neck somewhere. And they say, oh, God, you can't sell them as natural beef. Then.
Right.
Well, really, it doesn't do anything to them. It makes their muscles, it doesn't give them any more muscle, but it makes the muscle cells bigger. Yeah. So it looks like they're bigger.
More weight.
But I've never even tried to mess with that.
Why not?
But we give them, because I'm too lazy for one thing. You can give them vaccines. There's a 7-way. I think there's an 11-way now. And it's got black leg and I don't know, all the different things that animals would get. And it's just like we take for measles or mumps or chicken pox,
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
And so people who would complain about those injections don't understand what they're doing.
Yeah, that's true, what the point of it is. I get worried about that because people say they want no antibiotics in their milk or their meat, which I understand, which it's not allowed. If anything tests for any of that, it's thrown in the garbage.
Right.
But there are people who are then raising animals with none of that. And to me, it's like, well, if I was sick, I'd want to get antibiotics. Not that should go into the food system. You keep them quarantined, whether it's beef or dairy
until it's passed through.
Until it's out of their system.
Yeah.
But what about treating animals when they're sick? We should be able to do that.
I've been real lucky because I consider myself having a closed herd. The only thing that my cousin has some cattle across the fence, and then I borrow that bull from him. But other than that, my animals are a closed herd. I don't go buy replacements and come in. And I've been real lucky with disease. Maybe it's because I got to walk up and down them hills and it works and harder.
Exercise, yeah. There you go. Stay healthy.
Yeah.
That's what I should probably have a house on a hill and make myself walk up so I can get some exercise every day.
Yeah.
I don't get enough, my doctor says anyway.
Boy, I get enough when you got to go clear to the top of the hill to check something.
Yeah.
Anymore, I huff and puff.
Yeah.
Didn't used to bother me when I was younger.
No big deal back in the day.
Yeah.
Well, we are here at the Washington State Fairgrounds in Puyallup having this chat because the State Grange Convention is happening here.
Yep.
How'd you get involved in Grange?
I've been involved in Grange since I was about 9 years old.
No kidding.
We had a junior Grange in Castle Rock at the Sunnyside Grange. And my family has been Grange members. My dad and his two brothers were both members of one Grange or another there. And so I started, you could start when you were 5, but I didn't start till I was 9. And so basically I grew up in the Grange. Mm-hmm. We had our junior Grange meeting, which was the kids, the same night that the adults had their meeting upstairs. And so we would get our meeting done and we'd go play around. And then when they were done upstairs, they'd come downstairs to have their snacks afterwards, refreshments, I guess.
Yep.
And we'd go upstairs and get to run around that big empty hall and play.
So this would have been what, 60s?
Yeah. See, I graduated in 1970, so in 69, I probably joined about 60, somewhere in there.
So what
59.
is Grange? Because I think a lot of people think of it in terms of back then, but it's still a thing to this day.
The Grange is a community service organization now. Back then, when it was originally formed, was to help the farmers recover from the effects of the Civil War. It was formed in 1869. And we helped farmers all the way up through railroad laws. The Grange actually sponsored to have school buses be painted yellow, rural free delivery. In Washington, D.C. at the Smithsonian, there is a section on rural free delivery and the Grange influence on that. But then you go on up, we sponsored initiative. That's why we have PUDs. And that's why we had the blanket primary, which got thrown out eventually. We used it for 40 years or something. And so then we pushed that initiative to have the top 2
So
deals.
it's the Grange that's been behind some of this stuff
It's been behind that
state
stuff.
politics.
Yep. We're nonpartisan. We don't do party stuff, but we do issues, issues that we think are good. And that's what we're doing in there today or this week is setting our policy.
And so it's still connected to farming, though, and rural communities, right?
Yep. You're supposed to have an interest in agriculture. And if you go to the grocery store and buy something to eat, you have an interest in agriculture.
That's true.
That's how I always say that.
That's the basis of this podcast.
Yeah.
We're talking about the people who produce food, and everybody who eats food.
Yeah.
Hint, hint. Everybody should, unless there's somebody out there who's figured out how to live without food.
I don't care if you're vegan or you eat
Doesn't
meat.
matter.
You're still eating food.
Eating food, and this has to do with you.
Yeah. Right.
Producing food. What do you think? I mean, you live down there in Southwest Washington, so you're kind of like me up in Northwest Washington. We're a little farther away from that urban center, but not maybe like some folks in Eastern Washington. So we see what happens, say, in Seattle, and we see that disconnect.
Yeah.
What's your take on what's happening with farming and and then how that interplays with urban folks.
Well, I think the pendulum's starting to swing the other way to where the people in the city are starting to see that, hey, we got to protect this stuff, especially in Seattle or King County.
Yeah.
You know, you're starting to see more, what do they call them, conservation easements, or
Yep.
you know what I'm talking about, where,
Protecting farmland.
right, you're protecting that farmland to where you can't put houses on it. You've got to keep it in farmland. But you wouldn't have to do those things if farming was profitable enough to keep it in farming in the first place.
So the best way to protect it is to make sure that it's still profitable.
Make sure it's profitable for the farmer. Yeah.
Why isn't it sometimes now?
I don't know
Is
really.
that market stuff? Is it that contract kind of farming? Farms getting bigger?
Well, for one thing,
what is it?
America has the cheapest food, I think, of any country in the world. And we have to keep it cheap. So you got to cut the price of everything all the time. And so you get what you can get. And of course the farmer's on the bottom of the totem pole, or the bottom rung of the ladder, maybe you should say.
Yeah.
And he's got no place else to get his money, you know.
Yeah.
He's got nothing to pass on down.
Yeah.
He's got to sell his product at whatever he can get. And we're not unionized. I guess maybe that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what changes that? What do you think needs to happen?
I don't know. People need to understand that they need to pay more at the grocery store. But then I hate to see the middleman getting more just because the price went up at the grocery store. The middleman's getting more.
Yeah.
And
how much of that ends up making it to the farmer?
yes, how much makes it to the farmer?
And the problem is the larger, the 30,000 foot view here is not enough makes it to the farmer. Like you're talking about, it's hard to be profitable. Farm goes out of business. And then, like you say, they're still trying to protect that property.
Yeah.
But inevitably, a lot of that is going to get paved, developed, whatever it is.
Eventually, even they have these conservation buffers and these easements where you can't do it. Eventually, if there's nothing there, because nobody can make a profit on it, it's going to turn into houses or something.
So yeah,
Eventually.
So yeah, my question for anybody thinking about that is: so what's better?
Yeah.
For the environment, for the community,
The farm, the ground, grass growing, whatever, is better than asphalt.
right?
And
that's where I
runoff.
think we need to be careful not to be too picky about. I mean, our farmers need to be doing a good job.
Yeah.
But if we make it so hard and the rules are so unbelievably picky,
Yeah. I shouldn't
goes
mention,
away.
but I have springs. I get my water from a spring, and that creek goes down there, and I got a little creek runs down there, and I got a little creek runs down there, and if you had a 200-foot buffer on each one of them, I only got a little skinny piece of that field that I could use, and yet it's not hurting the salmon or anything. They can't come up there. It's too steep, and it goes down there, and it drops right straight down. So
yeah, because that was an idea floated a few times recently at the state level.
oh, yeah. The governor's proposal, yes. The governor and the tribe's proposal.
So what would that do to farms in that kind of a situation?
Put them out of business. Well, I could plant trees there, but then you can't manage the trees. I went through, this would be back when I was raising chickens. They had and of course it was after Mount St. Helens blew, so there was a lot of stuff changed. It was called the Arkansas Watershed something, I can't remember the rest of it. Anyway, they went up these creeks and they looked at them and see what they had, and I was on that committee, and so I could see what they were wanting to do. And when the mountain blew, it plugged up all the culverts, so the water backed up here, and it killed all the trees and stuff. As a matter of fact, the whole fields were down full of water there, long enough that it killed all the trees. And so then they're talking about, well, we need to shade those streams. I says, well, why don't you plant cottonwoods those poplar cottonwoods
Yeah.
on the south side of the stream, they'll go up real fast and they'll shade that stream. But then you need to plant in between that and then let us take those out. Oh, no, we can't do that. Whatever you put there has got to stay there. There's no managing.
And that's crazy because you want shade as quickly as you can
As
for the
quick as you
stream,
can.
keep the water cool.
Yep.
But long term, you don't want cottonwoods there.
Right.
That's not the native species.
They want cedar trees there.
but
Of course,
there
the beaver
again,
comes in and eats the cedar trees before they get big enough to do anything.
right. Yeah, you want cedar and probably Doug fir and
Yeah.
the native species.
But
Yeah, and yet these rules that maybe they're attempting to achieve something good actually end up making it not possible.
because they say you can't manage it. Well, I'm not going to plant it if I can't manage it.
Right.
So you don't get nothing.
And then doesn't happen.
It had blackberries and that shaded the creek, I guess.
Needs to be more talking and listening to each other and working together
Yeah,
to do
yeah.
these kinds of things, because folks like yourself who've been on the land know how the land works, know how the animals work, all of that stuff.
Yep.
You've got a lot that can go into how this could work really well, and everybody could be happy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that's what you guys do at Grange, though, right?
That's what we do at Grange. These resolutions and all the stuff that goes into our policy book started in a local Grange. Somebody didn't like something, they wrote a resolution, they bring it here, and they got to pass it there first, and then they bring it here, and if it gets passed on the floor, then it becomes our policy. So we're a grassroots organization. I don't
You're
know how.
democratic within your own organization, too, voting on
Yes.
stuff, and not everybody has to agree, but
That's right.
yeah.
Yeah. Actually, boy, it's been pretty smooth in there today. I've seen them take an hour on one little
People go back
word
and forth.
change.
Yeah.
So,
A lot of people aren't familiar with Grange and all the effort that gets put into reviewing laws and
Yeah.
policies and recommending things and working with lawmakers.
but it's one thing we've always said is the reason the Grange is still here today is because it's a fraternity, a fraternal organ of the Grange, and that has kept it going through hard times and whatnot. And to me, it's just I'd be lost if I didn't have a Grange to go to.
Well, and from what I'm hearing about it, nonpartisan, focused on grassroots ideas,
Yep.
not about going to one extreme or the other, but collaborating, working together.
Yes.
This is what a lot of people are hungry for with as polarized as our society and our politics are.
Yeah.
I think I'm hoping you talk about the pendulum swinging, that the pendulum will swing that way soon, and I think people are hungry for that because they're exhausted by the divided nature
Oh, yes. Right.
of our society right now.
Right.
And the Grange is an example of the antidote to that.
And we're still trying to stay in the middle of the road.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, a lot of people may think it's antiquated, but it's time for a resurgence of the Grange and
Yes.
organizations like
To
that.
me, we're still viable. We're still a good thing for society. And it's just a matter of getting people to come and talk to me, and I'll sign you up.
Well, thank you for sharing your story with us here on the podcast.
Hey, you're quite welcome.
I appreciate it.
This is the Real Food, Real People podcast. These are the stories of the people who grow your food.